Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start you off with the National Weather Service all hazards map as of about 5:15 a.m. Central Time this morning, where we see throughout the Mississippi, part of the Missouri, much of the Ohio Valley, these areas of, heat advisories with the lower and mid-Mississippi, or the Delta region, as we commonly call it, under excessive heat watches and warnings. Along the northern edge, we do have thunderstorms, some of which will be severe. We have flood watches out in this area early this morning as well. And so the questions we've been having is, all right, how long is this going to last? What's it going to look like after this goes through? How do we transition into August? And as you know, Matt and I have been going back and forth all week long trying to figure out what that's going to look like for, and I have a new idea about it today I want to share with you. And I want to share that with you because I finally got to just team up with Andrew and Matt to kind of have this discussion yesterday. So I want to walk you through our latest thought process on where we think the rest of the summer might be going, all right? Now, first of all, I want to let you know that these overnight lows we've been experiencing, like for example, at 5:10 this morning ahead of sunrise, we had numerous locations in the Midwest with overnight lows that likely are knocking on the door of record, overnight low temperature territory in the upper Midwest. But this is an atmosphere that is loaded with moisture, and it is preventing these overnight lows from cooling off too significantly. Now, we cooled off a bit in the eastern Corn Belt and Northeast. And the West, you have had a very interesting year so far this year in that we've had episodes of heat, but they've not been long in duration. They've broken off. And you're going to see that again in this upcoming forecast. And I want to kind of just get back into the reasons, why. It's actually been cool at times in the northern plains, Montana, getting into the Canadian prairie where there was great rains that went through yesterday. But I want to put together this picture that has something to do with this map. So since June 20, when summer fully came on both astronomically and then temperature-wise, especially in this corridor, which had very, very warm overnight lows, we have seen kind of a persistence in the pattern a bit. And I just want to know, how much longer is persistence going to be the right forecast for us? Now, thinking this through, okay, take a look at the rest of the country. Now, we've had a lot of flash flooding. We're in record territory with flash flooding. We've been cooler than average here, all right? We've had no long duration excessive heat in the west. Yes, there is drought building in the northwest, and it's been very dry. We're waiting on good monsoonal moisture, although Mexico has made a major recovery in their moisture going on, through this June and early July timeframe. But I want to talk about this heat that's to the east that spreads from basically the central Corn Belt to the mid-Atlantic and up toward the northeast. And I'm going to talk about it because yesterday I had an opportunity to kind of walk some fields with some of our guys at Nutrien, Craig and Keith, and we're here. We're in this climate reporting district, Champaign, and it's been the fourth warmest in terms of overnight lows for the last month. And we still have 2 more months of summer to go, and I want to know what these impacts may be. So as we're walking through some of the fields, I saw this, and I wasn't the first to point it out. Craig was. He's like, "Hey, have a look at this." And I'm down here now. What you see, all these, if you're unfamiliar with this, this is some of the pollen. These little things right here. There's bugs. That's pollen. But we were looking specifically at that. And what we're seeing in this particular case is what he explained to me is called rapid growth syndrome. So for this particular field, which had a cool May, cool front half of June, all right, brought on a ton of heat in mid to late June and now in July, and it grew very fast. Now, these leaves are below where the ear is being produced. So I said, is this going to have an impact on, ear quality, how big the ear is going to be in this kernels? And the short answer is probably not because of the way the top half of this particular crop looks. But speaking of the top half, we did run into some of this. So what you're looking at here is a leaf that has wrapped itself around the tassel. Now, normally, that leaf would open up like that, and all of this tassel will be exposed, and it would basically just fall off and fall down on the silks that were on, in this particular corn plant, pollinating the corn, and therefore giving us the ear that we need. But instead, and just a few plants that we were able to find, not many, but in a few, this leaf was wrapped tightly around the pollen, kind of preventing it from doing its thing. Now, it may be a near-term issue for this particular plant, but we're just curious how much of this is happening, around the country. So we're out there going through these fields. And by the way, there's no rain on this field, but the dew was so excessive because of how humid the atmosphere is. I walked out soaked, and we went in there at about, 10 o'clock in the morning. So just a couple of things to point out. But here's what Matt and Andrew and I sat down and had a discussion about. From June 19th through the end of August, 2010 was also one of these years where we had a lot of heat, especially in overnight low temperatures. Now, I don't expect, right, that the rest of July all the way through August is going to look like this. But, this idea came up like, hey, when was an analog year recently that had these hot overnight lows? And 10 came out, right? So we need to have a discussion about it. Why not? It's important to do that. We're building ideas together. Nothing's definitive, you know that, but I wanted to look at it. And I also looked at this. So from the beginning of June to the end of September, what did the precip look like? Now that's interesting because this doesn't line up well. We were quite dry in California, but we were wetter in the Northwest, wetter along the northern tibias, and very wet in the central and western Corn Belt getting up toward the upper Midwest. There was a bit of drier conditions that came up the Mississippi Valley, dry in pockets of the Southeast, wet here in New York, Vermont, New Hampshire. And so there are some similarities and some differences, and that's what's important to understand. There's no such thing as a perfect analog. But I started looking at this, and I'm like, all right, from June 1 till the end of July, what did the low-level winds look like? And take a look at that. There were stronger trades. There was an expansive Pacific high. See it? And there was an expansive Bermuda high right there. Now, you've heard Matt and I go on and on about this. That's almost identical to what we have this year, right? Strong trades, expansive Pacific high, expansive Bermuda high. It's all kind of similar to this particular year through July 20th. And it's just got us thinking about, what this might mean, because since June 1st, now to July 22nd, we have seen access to plenty of Gulf moisture because of that flow. We've had numerous flash flooding events. In fact, we're setting new records in terms of flash floods. We've been very dry in the Northwest, parts of the Intermountain West, California. There's pockets of drought that are showing up elsewhere. But overall, this is the case. And there are some, not perfect, but there are some similarities to 2010. Here's another piece of it. When you look at the jet stream behavior from June 1st to July 20th, we have had overall relatively zonal jet behavior. See this? Okay, it's been displaced north, which is why we've had access to heat, but it's allowed these subtropical highs to spin up underneath it in those two places. Now, I showed you earlier what last year looks like, right? Didn't we do that Friday? I don't remember what day it is I showed you, but we looked at the jet stream differences between a year ago and now. And certainly this is not what the big drought years look like. The jet stream there is all bunched up. There's big troughs and ridges, big standing waves. But guess what? This is what 2010 looked like from June 1 to 7/20. And there again, see that we don't have these major deviations other than a bit of a northward displacement in the jet. And then there's this. That's our current ocean temperature pattern. We have talked at length about how the warm water in through here, pushing into the Gulf of Alaska, has been a critical component to keeping, the Bermuda high in place, or the Pacific high underneath this area, forcing flow around it, which has enhanced these trade winds that we've seen both in North and South America, coming off North and South America, getting to the middle part of the, the Caribbean here, getting to the middle part of the Pacific Ocean. And look at this. This was 2010. They're going, whoa. It's different. But we still had a warm surge of water here. Okay. A lot of cool water off the coast. There was more cool water that was up here, in this part of the, Gulf of Alaska, which is maybe what promoted such a warm end of summer here. We don't have that. We've got all this warm water in place, which suggests not having a super hot finish to summer there. But there was a La Nina brewing, and it was a big one going into 10 and 11. So I'm just looking at all of this, asking these questions, like, is it going to look like that? Because when you go back to 2010, what happened in August? Okay, so this is August 1st to September 1st. The Pacific high stayed dominant here, but the Bermuda high drifted. And we kind of lost the Bermuda high in 2010. Now, this is how the flow ended up looking. Dominant Pacific high. See it there? Whoops, sorry. Let's draw that in the right direction. But the Bermuda high weakened. There was still some flow, but it kind of started to drift over in this direction. And we saw a La Nina trade wind pattern really kind of building in. So what was interesting was there were places that went into, starting in August, dry. And it was kind of a corridor in through here where we had been accessing plenty of Gulf moisture that we started to see patchy drought develop. Now I'm going to just say this one more time. This is not an analog, a perfect analog to 2025. In other words, I'm not anticipating this, but I'm trying to give a flavor to this upcoming forecast. All right. And this is what was also interesting. It got really hot and stayed hot for everywhere east of the Rocky Mountains for the month of August in 2010. Now, do we expect to see that? Well, take a look at what the European model's doing. In August, it's trying to take, the Bermuda high and shove its greatest anomalies here. There's something similar to that. All right. But the Pacific high is actually weakened on the backside. They're not looking at such a dominant Pacific high. So that is a major difference. And that difference is seen if you come into the United States and say, well, show me what the precip anomalies are going to look like. All right. They've continued to just stay with drier here, a bit more activity in the Four Corner states, drier in the Northwest, and a stormy corridor that rolls through that area, just like this. All right. Temperature-wise, let's go look at the 30-day temperature outlook. It's trying to keep a lot of the heat in the plains and prairie and back into this part of the Northwest. So it doesn't quite look like what you saw here, which was a lot of heat in this area. Now, I say all that and say, remember, though, this is what we've got from the seasonal update. Excuse me, not the seasonal. This is the monthly update from the CPC. That's their outlook for August. Not so similar in terms of temperature or precip. But don't forget that their 3-week and 4-week out, week 3 and week 4 outlook, which is the front half of August, looks something like this. So you remember, they released this on July the 18th. They put out that first forecast, well, I guess the day before on July 17th. That's interesting. They went from this for the August outlook released on the 17th to this on the 18th it was released of July for the front half of August. So I'm trying to make a point here, and I hate to say this, but things aren't settled at all. I don't think we have good predictability out into the month of August. Matt made a case yesterday. I tried to make one on Monday, and we're going to revise that again today. But I wanted to toss in 2010 into your brains just to have you thinking about one possibility. Now, my biggest thing is going to be, do we lose access to the Gulf moisture? Because take a look at what it did yesterday. I mean, we've had this moisture in place. So there's been big storms that have moved up into the northern plains. And we talked about why they're not getting into this area, right? We remember that on Monday? It's hot and it is too dry compared to the temperature. The specific humidity isn't high enough to just crank out huge storms. So the relative humidity is low. But we did have a low that kind of sat and spun up right here over this side of the Red River Valley, getting into northern Texas. And all around it, cloud cover, storms. Some of these produced hail. Severe winds to the north. There's a little bit of smoke mixed in with this. Isolated storms into the southeast. We're going to continue to watch a push of moisture come across this area going forward. But overall, this is what I see. There is that expansive Bermuda high. One piece there, a second piece there, and a third piece here. And the net effect of all of this is just we are shoving moisture around. It's being enhanced by the fact that every acre of corn right now, there's probably putting 4,000 gallons of water into the atmosphere to help the Gulf moisture produce bigger storms. By the way, when you hear 4,000 gallons of water, okay, that's a lot. But if you made that 4,000 gallons of water rain back out over the same acre that evaporated it, it's like 0.14 inches of rain. That's what it is. So when we see these storms really delivering much, much more rainfall, it's important to understand that the Gulf is the primary supplier of this moisture. Now, speaking of moisture, we're, of course, drier in the west. We're also drier in this part of the Ohio Valley, getting in the northeast. We have a bit of a drier, nicer morning overall for those folks. But my big story is going to be where's this big complex of Bermuda high-pressure systems, I guess we call it this year, going to be by the time I get into August. So what we know right now is that there's going to be severe weather that stretches along this corridor today. Be very aware of the risk of straight-line winds, hail, okay, and very heavy rainfall. See that? Tomorrow, the excessive rainfall outlook stretches from Kansas to northern Illinois, and then you can see here by the time we get in to day 3, it's going to be stretching across Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. And we just have a look at it right now. Our storms this morning, we've already got these are ridge riding type storms. There's big storm complexes that are moving through northern Nebraska, coming out of South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, the UP, big ones in Wisconsin, Iowa, northern Illinois, and then down here farther to the south, moving across the Gulf. And so we see that our model's pretty good initialization. If I pick this up about 8 o'clock in the morning, what I'm curious about is what later on today these look like in terms of their linear structure. Are we going to get storms that come out with strong straight line winds, kind of like what we saw yesterday? And are we going to have more hail events that run up and down kind of the high plains, in the Front Range here? Meanwhile, over the south, we do have the storms sliding this direction underneath the ridge. And they're going to probably do that as we get into the overnight hours and then Thursday. And that's what we're going to have to just continue to pay attention to. Now, the pattern is interesting because the artificial intelligence forecasts do not line up with the, with the operational models, the dynamical models. So for the next 15 days, this is a much different look than the forecast by the AI model, which is here, to what the dynamical models show. So as we get out there toward the end of this week, look at the trough Gulf of Alaska, trough West Coast, trough up here in northern Canada. This is the ridge that's coming back in to settle into the midsection of the country, which is why we still see more heat in this forecast, especially hot overnight lows. And the dynamical models, they just want to leave the ridge. They just leave it here. The AI model knocks it out. It just blows it out of there. So what we end up getting is cooler weather here initially, which Matt kind of alluded to, and we've been talking a little bit about this week. But they want to keep the heat back in the central U.S. Now, I got questions about all of that, and I'm going to show that to you as we go through this. The newest WPC 7-day outlook, again, I'm watching this corridor for having too low of relative humidity to get storms to pop. The atmosphere is humid, but not with respect to the relative nature of it. We're going to have ridge riding storms over the top of this. We're going to watch for drier in the interior here of this part of the Carolinas and Georgia. And overall, if you take that pattern the way it currently stands, you end up getting, pockets of just drought development. Now, the new European model run this morning, this is what it does through the end of the weekend. There it is. That's through Monday. Look at all the storms running through here and then coming in this direction. But, through the next 5 days, it tries to open up a corridor here where they don't have much at all. Maybe isolated storms, but not a whole lot. You then play it into next week. This is next Wednesday, Thursday. Watch this. The new European model, 10 days from now, 10, 11 days from now, is like, yeah, soak it. Just hit this area hard. And this is the area that Matt's been questioning, right? He's like, I don't know that we're able to keep the moisture out of here. And his main story is we have seen moisture get into this area lately, right? We've seen it storm. We saw the flash flooding in Kansas City. We've seen the rains coming out of Nebraska. So we're shrinking up this potential hole relatively quickly over the next 15 days. Now, when you stitch it all together, let's just look at the ensembles. The next 14 days, okay, there is a risky area in through here, I think, that could be drier. But we see to the south of it a push of moisture in this direction, to the north of it a very stormy corridor that opens up. And that's also echoed in the GFS. See it? It's kind of got this stormy corridor in through here, the push of moisture there, and it's got this area that's drier. Big wild card is going to be Kansas and Missouri in this particular pattern, in my opinion. Now, the AI model looks something like that. Much different. Like, look how much drier it is over a broader area of the Ohio Valley toward the Appalachian Mountains, the coastal plain here of South Carolina, North Carolina, getting up to Virginia. And I just want to show it to you because it's a different point to look at. Canadian Prairie, the AI model is very dry. Whereas if you come back here to the GFS, no. It's got dryness north of Highway 16. And the European model's got, same thing. It's driest pretty far to the north, much more normal storm activity into this area. So these are all just points of data that we have to take in and think through. In terms of probabilities, I just wanted to see if there was a robust solution for those two dry areas. So you can see the chances of staying under a ½ inch are pretty high there. And they're also pretty high here, but there's an extension that kind of goes in that direction. On the probability of getting more than an inch, okay, we now come back to our wet corridors. There's this one, right, that kind of comes through here, and then that one, which is coming in this direction. So there's I think it makes sense overall with the way the models are behaving. All right, context. Matt pointed out, is persistence it? For the last 7 days, this has been our wet corridor, right? Now it's been drier in the northeast, very dry in through this area, pockets of dryness over the southeast. Now, it's not to say that every place got rain inside of those two lines I drew. All right, but there's been moisture. We had very heavy rainfall for this time of year in parts of Oregon and sections of the Columbia River here as well. And there's been flash flooding down into parts of Arizona and some in New Mexico as well. Go back 2 weeks. Okay, that's what the last 2 weeks looks like. And for the last month, we're here. And so I'm trying to assess Is the atmosphere really just going to break this thing off and get rid of the Gulf transport and shut it all down? But this is the context to what Matt was discussing yesterday. There has been more places with adequate moisture, if you're east of the Rocky Mountains, all the way to the East Coast, than not in the last 30 days or so. So it comes down to the heat discussion. And as I mentioned, the minimum temperatures this morning are approaching records in the upper Midwest. But take a look at how they just don't change much. This is Thursday morning, Friday morning, Saturday. I mean, where's the cool weather? It's along the West Coast. We're still in the low to mid 70s all the way through Sunday into Monday and Tuesday of next week. Very, very warm overnight low temperatures. And the highs, major cool down here where the frontal boundaries. That's where we're going to have all our severe weather and risk of flooding. But inside of this, the Mississippi Valley, parts of the Missouri and Ohio Valley, very hot today. That's tomorrow. Getting into Friday, a little bit of a cool down here, but watch us rebound. There's Saturday, hundreds back in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, hundreds all the way over to the Front Range. There's heat in this pattern, but not in the West Coast. And that's been a unique thing because a year ago on the West Coast, blazing hot. One of the hottest, actually it was the hottest July on record across the West Coast. Now we see more of that here. But we've been paying close attention to its impacts. And over the next 7 days, yes, the accumulation of stress degree days right into this area is going to be very high, over 100 of them. And this broader area of heat kind of stays contained mainly within this region. But watch this. The new European model keeps the West Coast cooler over the next 5 days, the Canadian prairie cooler over the next 5 days. All the heat is here. Watch by the time we get to day 5 through 10. There it is. There it's expanding. There's cool weather coming in. And then the new forecast to basically look at the first 5 to 7 days of August, well, it tries to return some heat back into Canada and drops these temperatures here, especially in the Northeast. We've been watching that transition now for a few days. Now, I mentioned the AI model has a different solution. Well, this is what its solution looks like. That's the next 5 days, very similar to the European I just showed you. That's day 5 through 10, also not too different. And day 10 through 15, it's got some warmth coming to the Canadian prairie, but a lot of cool weather in this region. And that's just based on the different placement of where the ridge axis is going to be. So, we're looking at a shorter duration event. And most importantly, this is not what happened at the beginning of August of 2010. So that's why there are differences that we need to explore here, okay? So where do we finish this up? All right, back to 2010 versus 2025. Matt and I have been thinking hard about this. Where's this MJO and what does it mean? So since the beginning of June, the MJO has loved to stay in phases 4, 5, and 6. And that's put a lid over here. We've talked a lot about this, right? What happened in 2010? No. The MJO was over here in phase 1, 2, and 3. Now listen, phase 1, 2, and 3, those are the signals for heat and drought in this part of the country, from the Central Plains through the Midwest over to the east. Phase 1, 2, and 3 get that done. So now you see why we're sitting here going, well, in August of 2010, we were favoring phases 1, 2, and 3. See that? That's what brought on, where did I have those slides? There you go. That's what brought on all of this in July and in August. It was a part of the flow of the atmosphere that made that occur. So we say all of that, and we say, well, where is it now? Well, we pointed this out. Remember, the red is suppression, sinking. The green is rising. Over the next several days, we have a progressing, see it? Matt talked about yesterday, the progression of these waves of rising motion associated with the MJO, but they're convectively coupled that move across the Pacific Ocean. So there's still suppression in the Indian Ocean. Now, here's what you would want to look out for. If all these greens come back to here where I put the X, then we're on for heat. We're on for extended heat. That's a strong signal for it. But I don't fully see that. There's some, but not that strong signal. So what's my point? Well, maybe we'll just look at this first. Matt talked about it, right? MJO's lived over here. It's trying to sweep out, but maybe it just does that. It doesn't come fully out and live in this area. So here's what I want you to watch out for. If the models are wrong and we sweep way over here, hot, dry August east of the Rockies, that'll be more likely the case. That will break persistence. That'll give us a pattern shift. But we've seen the atmosphere attempt to do this many times. It's like, whoa, go back. It wants to be home, and home is over here. Now, what's the difference? Ready? If you go over to phase 2, which is, again, just to be clear here, that's over in this area with the MJO, these colors, all right, like it did in 2010. Where do you plant the ridge? Right over Lake Michigan. So the west is cool with good flow and wet. The central United States is hot, and we just run storms along the periphery. So that's where you get the dry Mississippi and Ohio Valley over toward the east. Now, if it just goes back to where it's been, you get this. That's phase 6. We tend to be drier in the northwest where we've been drier. We tend to get rid of the excessive long duration heat, and we come back to a stormy pattern in the midsection of the country. And to be honest with you, this entire narrative in summer comes back to just monitoring the one thing that I have been stuck on forever, and you know what it is. It's the Bermuda High. If I'm east of the Rocky Mountains, I just care about this. Now just watch. Until you lose persistent flow like this, can you see these wind barbs that I just drew the arrows over? Until that's gone, we've got access to moisture and access to storms. And here we are, July 29th, beginning of August. It's still there. And even though you're like, whoa, wait, did the Bermuda High move? Well, maybe, but I still don't lose access to this. And there's troughs coming through here to lift the air. And as a result, I cannot tell you that I expect a repeat of 2010 going into August. But if it does, you now know that it'll be an MJO Phase 2 event, and it'll be the Bermuda High drifting off to Ireland. So that's my thought process now. So we'll keep an eye on it, and in the near term, watch out for the heat that's coming up the Mississippi Valley and the ridge riding storms over the top of it. We'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.